So as we are seeing screens pop up, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. We are looking forward to a really interesting and helpful talk on advanced Mahjong strategy. We have people joining us from all across the US and London and Israel and all over. And for those of you, if you have friends that are saying they can't get on or anything yet, they could just re-register and it won't register them again and it'll send them a new link to sign in. So we have over 400 people. Donna is busy, our gatekeeper, letting everybody in.
And we're not going to let anyone unmute themselves. So please be patient. We have an hour and we want to get through all the great speakers and the topics we have.
Oh, in Australia too. All right.
All right.
So Anne, you could tell us in the chat what style of play you played in Australia. Because I know
what time is it there?
Well, usually when we have our virtual vintage, we keep Tony Watson up very late. He stays up very late from London.
Yep.
So if everybody wants to, they could share in the chat. We have New Hampshire in the house. Oh, you do play National Mahjong League. That's interesting. I wonder if there's a big group there. Very interesting.
Find out who they are. So in case we need a game when we go.
Exactly. Yeah. So you're planning on Australia. So welcome everybody. We're just going to give it like 2 more minutes for everyone who's in the waiting room to join us, and then we'll get started. For those of you that are just meeting us for the first time, because a friend forwarded this, my name is Dara, and Donna.
I'm Donna.
And then our panel tonight is Barney Gallassio, Donna Miller-Small, not to be confused with Donna Miller-Kassman. I work very well with Donna's. Michele Frizzell, Linda Fisher, and Theresa Bounassi. And all of them are incredible in all different respects. And in the interest of time, rather than giving a lengthy, wonderful introduction, we will refer you to our YouTube channel where we've had videos with all of them before. Because a lot of times we schedule these for an hour and there's so much to get through and we go over. So with that, the topics we're going to start with today is knowing your competitors. And we are going to start with Donna Miller-Small. So when it's your first time up, if you could just say your name and introduce yourself briefly. For those of you in here that have not been on Zooms before, you could change your view. So in the very top right, there's something that says view. You could click on that and you could do speaker view, or you could do like the Brady Bunch view. If you have any questions, we're learning as we go. This is our 2nd or 3rd year of doing all these wonderful Zooms. We try to let our guests do the talking and us stay back. So we will be monitoring the chat. If it's a question that must be asked then, we'll try to get to it then. If not, we'll save them for the end so we don't interrupt the speakers. So Donna Miller-Small, take it away.
Hi, I want to thank Dara and Donna for having this platform. Just briefly, I've been teaching Mahjong and Canasta for about 15 years. I live on Long Island. I teach mostly there. During COVID, my virtual wings were spread, and that's pretty much how I met Dara and Donna. Feel honored to be here. And after I did a virtual last year with them, a webinar, we connected around Canasta, and we are venturing into modern Canasta. And these are 2 savvy, smart businesswomen, and I'm just honored to be part of this endeavor. Dara and I created a book, and it's coming, and so you never know where life is going to take you. So anyhow, strategies about Mahjong, and I'm going to talk about knowing your competitors. And I like to say competitors. It sounds nicer. And the one thing I would share, the most important, is to be aware of their styles of play. Normally we play with, if we're not in tournaments, we play with probably the same groups weekly. And over that time, I observe what they do. Specifically, if we're playing 5 and I'm out and I'm watching how they pass, where they keep their tiles, and more importantly, there are hands that people often go for. And I kind of keep a mental note of that. I know a friend, maybe she's on tonight, I'm not sure. She likes the dragons, and I kind of know that about her. Also, what level of play are they? I'm wintering in a different community than I live. and we've played with a variety of people. And I noticed the levels are different. And that's also part of understanding what they might go for, what they might not go for. So also the other thing, and I can think of the one person in one of my games, do they call early? Do they, what we call push a hand? And if they do that, I know they're probably using their jokers earlier and taking more chances with them, and I watch it when I'm out. And so that gives me information, not always, but if it's that particular person that I know who calls and uses jokers right away, I might be more inclined to throw a hot tile. If there's 2 exposures up there, I'm going to think they might not be lucky enough to pull in those extra jokers. I am not advocating throwing hot, but that's part of knowing the style of the person who plays. So that's basically, there's a lot of things about competitors and the people we play with. There's other parts of that that are going to be talked about, but that's what I have to share.
Thank you very much. So next up is Michele Frizzell. A lot of people know her, but she'll introduce herself a little and talk about Charleston strategies.
Oh, wait, hold on 1 second. Before throwing hot, Donna, can you just answer what throwing hot means?
First of all, the later the game, the hotter any tile could be. But if I know that there's 2 exposures out there, I've got a pretty good indication of what hand they're going to be playing and what tiles are going to give them Mahjong. Those are called hot tiles in my vocabulary. I don't know if the panel would agree about that, but tiles that are likely to give someone Mahjong, and the later you get, almost everything could be hot, but watching what they've got up there is an indication if, and flowers are almost always hot, you know, it could be any time. Hopefully I answered the question.
Okay, so Michele, you're going to talk about Charleston strategies.
Yes, I am. Okay, my name is Michele Frizzell, and I have been playing Mahjong since 1973, but I learned American Mahjong using the National Mahjong League card in 1990. So I was playing another version, but I knew about the game, and that particular version that I played, Air Force Rules, had the Charleston in it. So it wasn't too much of a learning curve to get to American Mahjong using the National Mahjong League card. Most of the people in my sphere of influence played using the card, so I was somewhat forced to change my gameplay to that version, and so I've been teaching ever since. And when I moved to Atlanta, I moved to rural Georgia, north of Atlanta, and nobody played Mahjong here. So I took my lessons up online, and that's what led to my YouTube channel. And here we are today, where I'm continuing to teach online and trying to share the passion of the game with people everywhere. So I'm going to share a little bit about the Charleston strategies, and this can go far and wide, deep and wide, I guess. So I'm going to keep it pretty high level, and I do have a few visuals. So I'm going to share my screen really quick here. Can everybody see this screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. I'm going to very quickly share 3 ways to gain an advantage during the Charleston. The first thing I want to share is that there's a purpose for the Charleston. It's not just some wacky dance. I mean, it is a wacky dance, but there's a reason for it in the game. The purpose is for each player to have that potential to quickly improve their hand from their dealt tiles. So you can exponentially improve your starting position from the deal to when East discards their tile by exchanging up to 21 tiles in 7 passes. And I'm not going to go into the mechanics of the Charleston. Hopefully everybody knows that, or you can always watch my videos on that. But the idea is to expedite building your hand. The next thing that I want to quickly share is that there's 4 stages in hand development: target, gather, build, defend. And along these stages with the Charleston, you're going to target and then gather. That's the focus during the Charleston. analyze the situation, identify alternatives, consider your choices, and then make a decision and move on. Try not to overanalyze. This is all about first targeting your strength, which we'll talk about, and then gathering to support the strength of the hand. When it comes to the card, most of the blocks on the card are big multiples. 86% have pungs, kongs, and quints, if you have jokers, of course. Mixed suits are big as well. And then we're not going to go into this any deeper than the first two there, other than to compare that to one suit, which is 29%. So really big multiples, pung, kong, and mixed suits, those are the most used blocks and patterns. When the first technique that I want to share here is to optimize. You want to make use of the most of your tiles. That's optimizing. Since most of the hands have pairs, pungs, and kongs, build around them. I call those multiples, pairs, pungs, kongs. This will optimize your hand for a quick build. So this would be targeting. You're going to target multiples. You can see the multiples here, 1, 3, 5. That's where you would build around. You would gather tiles to support the multiples, and then pick a category that uses most of your tiles. If you don't have multiples, you're going to maximize. And this is where you use most of your tiles. That's the other technique, maximize. Use most of your tiles. And then while you're gathering during the Charleston, when a multiple forms, you reassess and build around the multiple. So you kind of go backwards a little bit and retarget. So you're going to target the multiple once it forms, and then look at your tiles and gather those tiles that will support that multiple, and then play a category that uses most of your tiles supporting the multiple. That's maximize. Here's another example of maximizing where a multiple forms, the 6 dot. So we could maybe play 3, 6, 9. That would use most of the tiles and the multiple. The last technique is streamlining. This is when you focus on consecutive run. The reason for that is because it is the most flexible category on the card. You have 1 through 9, 3 suits, big sequence. You can go up or down that sequence. So it's very flexible, and it has only one less hand than odds, which has the most hands. So you have a lot of options and a lot of flexibility. So this would be streamlining. A bonus is that you can power up by combining these techniques: optimize, maximize, and streamline. If you can do all 3 of those, you're probably going to be looking really good at the end of the Charleston. So at the end of the Charleston, if you have more than 4 discards, you're probably going to be an underdog for that game. If you have 4 discards, you're a contender. And if you have less than 4 discards, you're a front runner. That'll give you a little litmus test on your decision making during the Charleston. That's what I have to share so far, anyway.
Perfect.
Yeah, whenever I'm playing, I hear your voice. Build around the multiples. Build around the multiples.
Yep.
And then if there's any of our panel that has something to add, was there any, but I didn't know if any hands were up. Okay, terrific. So our next guest on our panel is Linda Fisher. And if anybody on Facebook Marketplace has seen pictures of Bryant Park Mahjong games, Linda Fisher is who to thank. And it is just an absolute glorious oasis in the middle of the city to play. So Linda is going to be talking about observation and information gathering and playing style.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here. I'm Linda Fisher. Short bio, I learned to play in 1961 when I was 9 years old. My aunt was the Mahjong queen of the Bronx, and she taught me how to play. And so a lot of my strategy I got from her. Over the years, I just kept playing. I played in tournaments. I started a blog in 2010 that I haven't really updated it because everybody else is doing such a great job of documenting Mahjong. But from that grew the Bryant Park social games. So I'm mostly a social player now. But I still play regularly, and with a regular group, I teach at libraries and senior centers and spread the word about the game. So I really love it. But, you know, over the years, I played kind of at a, I wouldn't say a mediocre level, but as an average player. And I used to say to myself, how do you get better at this game? How do you get better? And so it's slow going, but two things, I'll give you two things that I learned. One is a tournament strategy. Don't eat pasta for lunch. I found I had pasta, I got sleepy, I couldn't focus. The carbs just did me in. So I learned that it's important when you're playing to have focus, that you want to pay attention. That's the main thing. Then many years later, I was playing with a group of women who were much better players than I was. And I kept wondering why I was losing. And I realized they knew exactly what I was playing. They knew. And I realized that it's not all about your hand. That once you establish your hand, you know, using Michelle's great strategies for the Charleston, but you know, you have to know the card backwards and forwards. That's a given. You do your Charleston, so you have your hand in your mind, and you have your plan B. And I think someone else is going to speak about alternate hands, but you need to know what you're doing and keep your eyes on the table. So an important strategy is to have that focus and look around. Watch what other people are doing. What are people throwing? What are people calling? It's more than just knowing what exposure goes with what, so that you could tell what they're playing. So if somebody puts out 4-9 cracks, let's say, just listen. Did they throw a 3-dot? Because that information is going to be important at the end of the game. When you pick a 3-dot and they have 6 cracks and 9 cracks, and you're like, oh, are they doing 3-6-6-9? Or are they doing 3-6-9-9? But you remember, you heard them throw the 3-dot. So it's safe for that player. You know, you may get surprised by another player, but paying attention to that kind of stuff. If you pass in the Charleston, you know, like shift your eyes a little bit and notice, what are they keeping? What are they giving to you? What are you giving away? Because I notice what people give to me and I keep it in my mind, but I also notice if I have to break up a pair or a multiple that doesn't go with my other hand. So I know I'm passing around a couple of 9 dots. I'll try to keep one and get rid of it right away. And then I'll know if somebody kept the other 2. So it's an information gathering. Every tile you throw, every tile somebody else throws is a little piece of information that will help you later on in the game. Another little trick is when somebody pulls a tile, where do they take that exposure from? Are they taking it from the middle of their rack? Are they taking it from the beginning, from the right side? That gives you a little clue because, you know, smart players don't put things out in order, right? Like if I take tiles, put them out, I push them over to the left right away. So they don't know, are these, you know, 4 or 5 cracks the first exposure, or is it the first pong, or is it the last one? I just push everything over. So where are they taking it from? And, you know, every little thing that you pay attention to, you kind of add to your information base. And my last point is, and I know this is a pet peeve of mine. Don't listen to people who are talking at the table. You know, you'll play, if you're in a social game, somebody will start talking about where they went for dinner, where they're going tomorrow, what their son did, you know, and that takes your focus off the game. And so it's not so much that you are so competitive and fiercely, you know, but you need to have that kind of zone that you're in to know what's going on at the table. So I'll
That's
be back
wonderful. Thank you,
later
Linda.
for.
That's
So
great. Yes.
Linda, and this might be going into Barney, so raise your hand if this is something. We play with someone who actually watches our eyes look at the card, which that I actually think is a little bit much. But I do watch, if I hand someone 3 tiles in the Charleston and they look at them and just don't even put them in their rack and just pass them along. Do you think that's good strategy, or do you think that's a little much?
Well, you know, it's very hard to keep focus on every little detail every moment. So, I mean, and I'm guilty of that too. I'll look at something and I'll even say, oh, this crap, you know, what are you giving me? And pass it away. But that's information. I'm telling somebody, I'm telling them, I'm not playing these tiles. Right? So yeah, so Barney is going to talk about these little tells that are also information in the game.
Yeah, that's a great segue to Barney. Barney's our next speaker. Barney Gallassio is going to speak on verbal and nonverbal cues, how to stop bad habits. So take it away, Barney.
I would love to ask Linda a question if it's okay before we go on. I think we're doing okay with time.
Yeah.
Linda, great information. I do have a question. I'm sure there are some people who've joined us tonight that are maybe newer in their life cycle with regard to Mahjong. And I'm just wondering if you could give some idea of how some of what you said is going to take time. I would say that some people new are probably thinking, I could barely decide what hand I'm going for. I'm not going to remember she threw that 3 dot. You know, how much time does it take in your mind before someone could really hypothetically get to the point of being that good at remembering everything and every discard and every pass and whatever? Because it's a lot of work and it's not easy.
Well, it depends on a lot of things. It depends on how much time they're willing to put into it, right? And you know, what the level of commitment is to want to be a good player. And so, I mean, I would say the first commitment is to learn the card, learn the card. And then you have it internalized, you know, and then you can turn your attention to something other than staring at your rack and trying to remember what you're supposed to call.
That's what I was going to say. The best players seem to memorize the card and can focus on other things. So, Barney, you want to introduce yourself a little?
Hi, everybody. This is Orange Guy. I love orange and wearing my psycho bunny, might be my psychotic bunny today for the topic tonight. But I live in New Jersey. I've been playing for only 7 years, but a little obsessed with the game, as I think some of you probably know. And I love all aspects of the game. So I wanted to talk tonight about one of my favorite topics. And I know this is a topic that we could spend literally hours talking about tells, because it's constant that I will see something or hear something at a table that tells me so much. And I don't even think people realize that they're doing it. I think it harkens back to the day when I used to teach how to give effective presentations. And one of the things we used to do in that class is we had to tape you, because you presenters sometimes don't even know the things that they're doing. They'll say things like, you're not supposed to use words like and long periods of silence. And people will say, oh, I absolutely don't do that. And then you put them on tape and lo and behold, they realize I said 12 times. I didn't even realize that I did that. I'm surprised. And unfortunately, we don't have the opportunity to be always videotaping ourselves while playing Mahjong. But I think if we did, it would be a remarkable eye-opening experience of how we are doing things that we might not even know that we're doing. And some of them are silly, but they tell me certain things every time. One example, didn't know this, but one woman I play with, as soon as she gets set, she starts twirling her hair. Literally twirling her hair, no twirling at any other point in the game, all of a sudden set and twirling. Another person that I play with racks beautifully. Every one of her picks, she's racking. The minute she gets set, there's no more racking. The tile comes into her hand, immediately discarded. So I know right away she's probably set. Very good chance that she's set. It really is remarkable. Leaning forward, all of a sudden, nice posture, sitting back, playing normal, and all of a sudden this leaning forward. So one of the tricks that I have, because it's impossible to not change your posture or whatever, but I do my best, especially with my hands, to try to keep my hands in exactly the same position at the start of the game throughout. Because one of the things I found myself doing is really changing where my hands were. If I was putting them under the table or sitting on them or crossing my arms or whatever. So whatever position I get initially to start the game, maybe it's hand left and right of the rack, I try never to move my hands from that position throughout the whole thing. Because once I notice someone who has now shifted their body, all of a sudden it's the shifting of the body is like, so there's a lot of things that people do with their body that really tells me right away it's coming to the end. Some of them are incredibly obvious too, right? Some of them who pick a tile that they know somebody else is playing with, they look at them and all of a sudden they're slamming the tile on the right side of the rack. And up, there went my hand. And then we start getting into the things that people say. And the things that people say is my other favorite category. Every word out of everybody's mouth, if it's not about the dinners or whatever, tells me something. I was playing a game a few weeks ago, and one woman, it was obvious she could have done two hands. One of them used flowers, the other one didn't. Somebody threw the flower, and we all sort of gasped because that was one of the hot tiles that we heard Linda speaking about. So there was a little gasp, and the woman announced, "Oh no, that's okay." And I'm thinking to myself, you just told us she's not playing the hand with the flower. And so some really easy words that people can use from time to time can give away so much. So I too, I think Linda said that she tries to stay quiet, and maybe not paying attention, all that. I try to say almost nothing during the play, almost nothing. And another thing I will tell you, sometimes even the person walking around the table who's placing the bet might say a word or two that sort of reveals a little something, and it could be words of like, this is a really tough bet. Everybody's got good tiles, or, walks around the table, says nothing, and immediately writes the name down. Somebody's probably in the lead. And there's a lot of things to just be, in my mind, paying attention to with regard to there's so much information being revealed through nonverbal cues and sometimes even in the words that are coming out of people's mouths. So I think it tells a lot. And I think if people just are very mindful of that while they're thinking of everything else, I think it's a way to grab a tiny advantage in some areas in some games. And again, like I said, this is one that we could spend a lot of time on, but those were a couple that I haven't heard people talking about most recently. So I wanted to share them with the group tonight.
Thank you very much. That's terrific. And then actually, we just had a question that I was typing an answer. Someone asked, what's a good way to memorize the card? And while memorizing isn't needed, you gave a great example of what you do every year.
Oh, yes. Yes, I do believe that, memorization is not going to make anybody a super player. One of the things I just like to do for the purposes of doing it. But one of my tricks is, and it works for me. I don't know that it works for everybody. I literally, with the grid paper, I buy these grid pads. They have little grids, and I write them out in each of the boxes, every single hand. I write every single hand 3 or 4 times, and my mind just starts to remember that. And my other little trick is every hand, I build every hand with the tiles multiple times on a rack. So I'm familiar with where the tiles are going and stuff like that. So those are my 2 personal things that work for me.
And then I know this is advanced, but there are some people who just jumped into the game and want to come and listen, even if it's above their head. So a few people asked what set is. So I call set when I'm one away from winning, but some people say for an exposure as well, or basically set.
For me, and again, everyone maybe will share their opinion. I see Michelle is set means waiting. I'm waiting. I'm set. I need one tile at this point to either pick or call for Mahjong.
My definition of set is when you are able to claim a discard to complete all the exposable blocks in your hand. I call that being set, because I call waiting, or one away from winning, meaning you need one tile, I call that ready to win.
Okay.
So actually, that's great that you were speaking, Michelle, because you are next on reading hands.
Okay, excellent. Well, someone had spoken about reading hands a little bit during the Charleston, where you try to remember what everybody passes. That's very difficult to do, especially if you don't have a good short-term memory like me. So you can try it, and you can, if you're good at remembering, short-term memory, you can try to read hands during the Charleston by remembering who passed you what, but also who did not pass what. So for example, if the player on my right, for her two, let's see, so it would be the player on my right for her two lefts to me, first left and second left, if she never passes me wins, well, I can probably assume that she may be playing wins, but I don't think I can remember that much, because I'm also going to be thinking about my own hand and what I'm passing and passing defensively. But if you have that capacity, try to remember who passes you what, and also what people are not passing. That is advanced. What I try to do during the Charleston for hand reading is focus on the player to my left, because I'm building my hand, focused on building my hand first, and then taking one pass at a time and passing as defensively as I can with my discard tiles, the tiles I'm thinking that I'm not going to be using. I just do the best I can with those, and consider that every pass is going to have some level of risk regardless. Somebody could keep one tile at work at best, and at worst they're going to keep all three, and then you cringe. But for the player on my left, since I'm passing them twice in a row, I want to be very mindful of what I give them, and that goes to speaking to the person on my right and trying to read their hand by seeing their passes. So consider those things. That you can read hands in the Charleston if you have that ability to have that short-term memory and leverage that. As far as when you get into the pick and discard phase of the game, you want to observe, like what Barney was saying, tells. For example, when people are discarding, especially in the middle game, the third wall, or even the fourth wall, and you start seeing people flinch a little bit, or maybe hesitate at a discard, those are tells, and you can use that information based on exposures that are out, not only on their rack, but on other people's rack, and try to, by process of elimination, figure out what hand they're playing. Now, reading hands, by the way, is advanced. So if you're new to the game, try not to feel overwhelmed and think that you're going to do that right away. It takes time to develop that kind of a skill. And plus, you have to really know the card well, because you're gathering intel based on limited information, because people are going to have concealed tiles. So you look at the flinches, the body language, maybe facial expressions and things like that, but also you look at the discards that are out and the exposures. And then by process of elimination, you try to figure out what people are playing. Now, typically when you're playing in a social game, people tend to discard in front of them. Not always, but most of the time they do. So if you're really observant, you can look at those discards in front of them and see their exposures, and by process of elimination, figure out at least what category they're playing, if not what hand they're playing, the more exposures they have. Now, once people push out a wall, they're going to mix up the tiles a little bit. And when that happens, you kind of have to start over and then re-survey the table for those discards that maybe will be static for a little while. So you can keep that in mind. And really, it's all going to be about awareness and process of elimination and knowing the card as far as reading hands.
I have a question for you, Michele. So what do you recommend when the game is going too fast and you tend to flinch, you tend to pause because you don't know if you need that tile, but it's the game is just too fast for you?
Mm-hmm. For me, it really depends on what kind of a game you're playing in. If you're playing in a social game, I would say wait. But every time you say wait, it's a tell.
Right.
So knowing what you're playing and what your potential is to continue building your hand, and knowing whether or not the risk of making an exposure is good based on what you have in your hand, what's been discarded, what's been exposed, you weigh that, you count that cost of outing yourself, whether it's by saying wait or calling it and making an exposure. You think to yourself, what is my potential to complete my hand before anybody else? If it's great, then do it. If you feel like you're an underdog, kind of like what we were talking about, where you have more than 4 discards at the after the Charleston, you might just focus on building until you get to that point where you're confident that you could maybe be a front runner. So really, it depends on those variables.
Well, it's interesting because everybody who is on our panel, we've done individual Zooms with and talks with, and I learned a lot from your prior one talking about tells. We used to always complain who is the jokers, and now if I have 1 or if I have 4, I mean, I just smile and, you know, raise an eyebrow.
Mm-hmm.
You were saying about reacting, and right now on Instagram, which only because of our social media, or I mean, I'm on Instagram for this, but there's a group of videos going around and they're react videos, and it's like music from the 80s, and you're supposed to just sit there and not react to all this music that you want to dance to. So it's almost like a good tell, like, know you want the 3 dot, and just when the 3 dot's thrown, just kind of be, you know, looking away, look at your rack, and
Yep. There's
nothing you could do about it.
There is Mahjong's version of poker face. And incidentally, sometimes I wonder if people think I'm kind of a grumpy person, because I'm stoic when I play the game. I don't talk much, I don't say much, and I don't smile much. I play my hand, and that's where my focus is. And if someone were to say something like, oh, you missed your joker, I just ignore it. I don't even say a word. I just pretend like I didn't even hear what they just said. Because even by reacting to say, I might not need a joker, well, that outs me. So it's okay to play seriously during the game and keep the chatter at a minimum, because the body language, the verbal tells, even the way you move your tiles can give people information if they're observant.
So you're the exception to my rule that people's personalities follow them to the table, because outside of the game, you are very friendly and bubbly. So.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I smile and I do some social chit chat, but it's pretty minimal. I did see somebody asking on here about discarding tiles not in front of you, but should we be teaching our students to discard tiles around the table, never in the same spot, especially right in front of yourself? So I have a pet peeve. When someone discards a tile across the table, I'm like, please, just put the tile out there, give it a little shove and move on. You don't have to be so obvious. Just casually put the tile out there, maybe give it a scooch to the side, and keep the space in front of you as open as possible. And then look forward to the moment when you can push out the wall and disrupt the tiles, gently, of course. You don't want to wreck any beautiful vintage tiles by being forceful.
Right.
So yeah, you want to try to keep the tiles away from you if you can, because observant people can figure out what you're playing based on that information.
Okay, great. So next up we have Theresa Bounassi, all the way from Anchorage, Alaska. I hope Theresa's here. She's going to talk about discard, prioritization, and backup hands.
Yes. So my name is Theresa Bounassi. I moved to Anchorage, Alaska less than a year ago. I've been playing since about 2007, and been teaching and run local tournaments for charity and stuff like that, and teaching here in Anchorage to my neighbors. So I'm trying to build a Mahjong community here. So discard prioritization and backup hands. First, discard prioritization. When you're done with the Charleston, remember there's only 53 tiles that have been seen in the Charleston. Not all 53. Sometimes it's just a certain number because people keep certain tiles in their hand the whole time. So you know those after the optional are tiles that most likely no one wants. So why would you discard those first? You know, sometimes people would joke like everyone starts discarding wins. I was like, okay, I guess no one's playing wins. Why do that? You know, no one needs it. So save them a little longer when you know no one's playing those tiles. So anytime you have a fresh pick, no one knows what that is. By discarding it if you don't need it. If you're playing 2, 4, 6, 8 and you pull a 9, discard it right away because it's going to make someone else's hand harder to build. So I usually save what's left over at the Charleston a beat or two, just because, you know, especially if I pick something I don't need, I won't discard those right away. Now, once you start building your hand, you have to start discarding those. The other thing is discard prioritization. So let's say like when it's been discussed by other panelists about discarding a joker. Discarding a flower. And so I'll say, you know, flower. One, don't make it obvious like flower. And then, you know, sometimes you like want to look, you know, you're trying to tempt people. Are they starting to look? Are they paying attention? But if the person to my right discards a flower, I sometimes think, oh, phew, I could discard this flower now because no one called it. If I do, chum the table, that's a good one, Michelle. So you do the same tile, especially if you don't need it. And the other thing is what I like to tell people is fish or cut bait. Sometimes like, oh, I don't know what hand I'm playing. And they sit on the fence until the very end and they never move either way. So it's like fish or cut bait. If you think someone puts up a pung of flowers, it's a high likelihood they need another pung of flowers, especially with this card. Well, why are you holding the flower? Unless you're going to change your hand to a flower hand, get rid of it sooner than later, because you're just prolonging your pain. Or if you're keeping it, then you have made a conscious decision to keep it to the end and you're pushing for a wall game. Because what's the point of building your hand if you're holding onto a flower and you're not playing a flower hand and you think someone needs a flower? So it's just better to get rid of it. And sometimes it takes a little while, especially with this card. I've noticed that by and large, when people have two pungs of flowers, there's maybe a joker. There's not going to be a lot of jokers. So sometimes like, oh, I want to do joker bait. Sometimes you just wait too long and you give someone else Mahjong, you know, because they have a 4-flower hand and they just need 1 flower. And you didn't even realize they're doing it. You're focused on the person with a pung of flowers and they're playing the first 2, 4, 6, 8 hand. So that's tile prioritization. Then the other thing that kind of morphs into keeping tiles to build, you know, having backup hands. So let's say you're playing 2, 4, 6, 8. Well, you have some 6s, you might want to keep 3s or 9s so you can transfer over to 3, 6, 9, especially if people start discarding things that you need. You don't have your pairs set or you haven't pulled any jokers. But for anyone who's not new to who is new to the game and it's, you know, they're watching this video to get some advanced strategies. One of the things that I teach is if by the end of the Charleston, you don't have 50% of your pairs, some combination, whether it's, you know, you have 2 pairs, you either have 100% of one or 100% of the other or one of each. If you don't have 50% of your pairs, I don't recommend only focusing on that hand. Start immediately transferring over to a hand that has no pairs. Because if you don't pull your pair, someone calls it and puts up pung or kong, you're out of luck and you have nowhere to go. So always think of it that way. Like people will start with a hand and they're thinking they're doing this hand and they don't have any of their pairs. They have everything else, but they don't have any part of their pair. I always recommend don't even, unless you pull it early on, move on to a different hand and start keeping things that will help build that other hand. So think about what goes around the tiles you already have. because you get approximately 25 picks, fresh picks from the wall after the Charleston. So you have all those picks plus all these discards that you might be able to build your hand into another direction. So being flexible is a sign of an advanced player, and starting to think, okay, they have 2 exposures. We're in competition. We're in each other's hands. I need to move if I want to win. And if I don't think I can win, am I pushing towards a wall game? And if you're pushing towards a wall game, by the end of the game, your rack should look like you just got dealt your tiles, because you should be analyzing what everyone should be needing, and you don't want to throw that. And back to something, Donna, that you asked. I'm trying to think, I just lost my train of thought. You asked Michelle a question about
if the game's going
discard.
too fast, the pace of the game is.
Oh, that's it. That's exactly it. So what I teach people is, when it's your turn, that is your time to think. So sometimes if the game is going so fast, don't feel like you have to keep pace, because it's like, oh my gosh, I'm playing a crazy hand or a new hand to me, or, you know, the card just came out and I'm not as familiar as maybe someone else is, or maybe they just got dealt like the hand screaming at them and they know exactly what they're playing. Once you rack your 14th tile, you could take time. I'm not saying take 2 minutes, but take a little bit of time, observe what's on the table, observe what's in your hand. Okay, this hand's no longer viable because I didn't realize, you know, my pair's gone. I need to move around. What else is out there? And that's your time to think. But that's a skill that takes time to be able to keep pace with people who play real fast. And if you go in sitting down thinking, okay, I'm playing with a lot of fast players, I'm not coming to the table to win. I'm coming to the table to learn and to build my speed. So as long as you're not anticipating having an amazing day and winning every game, and you're just like, look, I'm wanting to keep pace and that's all I'm worried about, then you'll be fine and you'll be happy with yourself and you'll build your skills, because all it is take time and experience. So any questions? I think
So you were saying about Fisher cut bait, and a lot of times people will have like 2 soaps and have nothing else that goes with them, and or just a soap and a green and they consider them valuable tiles. But if they're not valuable for their hand, they're not worth anything. So in that respect, I wanted to thank you, and there were several other people on this Zoom talk. We did a study on the Charleston, and it's obviously not statistical, but we asked everybody to keep track of how many times the Charleston was stopped, what after the game, not during it, but after, why did you stop it, and whether they won or not. And for the most part, the only time stopping the Charleston led to an increase in wins was when they only had 2 or less tiles to pass. It did not increase their win percentage at all if they stopped it because they were between hands. And that kind of goes to one of the questions about how you speed up a slow player. For the most part, just explain to them that you can't play 2 hands at once. That really helps players make decisions.
I have found that people that stop the Charleston because they're deciding between 2 hands can never decide between the 2 hands, and their hand just goes away. So it's like, pick a category, and like Michelle says, get rid of everything that's not in that category. But when usually you're between 2 hands, I say, you know, if you have your pairs, then go with that hand. If you have your Kong, then do a hand that doesn't have pairs and go with that hand. And the other thing I always recommend is if you're at the end of the first lap, you did your second lap, and you have to do a must across, or either across, and your hand is set, like you're really strong, you have less than 2 tiles to pass, but it's a must across, and you're like, what do I do? You pass your Pung. You pass something you can call when it gets discarded, because if you already have most of the tiles, most likely a person's not going to keep it. Or you could fill it in with a joker if you need, you know, you don't pass your Kong and you don't pass your pair, you pass your Pung, because that is easier to build than anything else. And someone did ask about what is chumming the table. Chumming the table is like, it's almost like joker bait. Like if someone threw a 9 dot and you are worried someone needed a 9 dot, you have a 9 dot, you also throw the next time. Your next discard is the same exact tile, because the person didn't have an opportunity to call it. They're not set to call it. So you go ahead and make their hand more difficult to build because you just threw the second, third, fourth, same tile.
Perfect. Thank you.
I have a little something else to add to chumming the table, that concept. So, and someone else asked about joker bait. I saw that Dara did put a definition of that, a short definition in the chat. So another example of chumming the table might be, let's say you have a pung that you don't need. Sometimes it's a pair, but you could have a bigger multiple that doesn't fit the most of your tiles around other multiples. So let's say that you're in the middle of the middle game and you have a pung of sevens. And there are no other sevens out, let's say, maybe sixes and fives are even a little light. You think, okay, is someone holding sevens? Maybe I'm going to throw one of those out right now to see how people react and test whether or not my remaining pair of sevens could be good joker bait later. So you throw the seven to chum the table, to test the reactions and kind of, you know, stir up the sharks, as it were, if you're thinking about what chum is. So you're throwing it out there to kind of get reactions. And if nobody even flinches at that seven, well, then you could probably assume that those sevens are not going to be of interest. But if you see someone flinch or hesitate in some way, or maybe shuffle their tiles or something, then you can rethink that and think, okay, well, maybe I'll hold on to this pair for just a little longer and then try to use it as joker bait.
Terrific. So next up, we have Joker Exchange Strategies with Donna Miller-Small. I think, did we lose Donna? Oh, no, there you are. Oh, you're muted, Donna.
Oh, okay.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, good. Interesting about jokers. They're one of the most talked about tiles in Mahjong. I just wanted to, there's a lot to cover. Just want to, particularly, we might have new players here or more recent players, and there were not always jokers in Mahjong. They came in 1961, and Tom Sloper has a whole chart of when they came in and how they were integrated. During writing the Canasta book that I just finished with Dara, jokers came into Canasta in the 50s, and that was the most popular game, more than Mahjong, in the early 50s. There were not joker cards in Canasta initially, and then they came in. Dara found an article written in Sports Illustrated by the famous Charles Gorin, who was not only a bridge player, but wrote Canasta books and strategy. And they just kind of roguely started using them in Canasta. Right after that happened, this was in the late 50s, the Mahjong League was petitioned to put jokers into Mahjong. Isn't that interesting? They used more flowers in the old days. Some of them, there were a variety of uses for them. And in 1961, right on the heels of jokers coming to Canasta, and it was called Joker Canasta in those days, the Mahjong League puts 2 jokers into sets. And if you have old sets, and they ended up with what we have in 1971 being 8 jokers. And if you see vintage sets, you might see nail polish that was put on flowers that could ruin tiles, or little stickers that the Mahjong League came out with. So that's just a little interesting history. I love stories about how things happen. Okay, just also wanted to say, off topic, but something that came up about talking and focus. We have a norm in my regular groups. After the Charleston, nobody talks. It just doesn't, and if they start chatting, if somebody new is subbing in, we remind them that we're not talking because it takes your focus. You can't hear. Anyhow, we talked about, it's come up about joker bait, and that is one of the key strategies of getting jokers. I think Tom Sloper termed joker bait. I teach that as a strategy, and what Michele and what was being talked about was, if you, pairs are important, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute in relation to jokers, but if you have a pair of something, or even better, a triple, you're going to, as the game gets later, people are going to have more abilities to call and use jokers. I think the example, the 3-7 dots that Michele gave is great. If you're playing with somebody like Michele, she may not flinch on that first 7 dot that you throw. And it could be a test, but you don't want to do that with flowers. That's the only tiles that you don't want to use for joker bait. The later it gets, those are not the tiles. And I wouldn't hold 2 soaps either. But a pair, if you throw it out, I think the percentage is about 25% of the time you're going to get a joker exchange. And just as a note, protocol, and I see this with beginning students, they can't wait to get that joker. You have to pick and rack your tile first, or you should pick and rack it. You must pick, I call it PRET, pick, rack, exchange, take the joker and throw out. You have to do that before, or you will be called dead, because you can't do it the other way. It disqualifies you. Okay. Also, when I love jokers, but you know what? I almost would rather have the right tiles than jokers at times. If I pick in 3 or more jokers, I immediately start looking at queen hands. And people who play with me might know that I love the queen hands. And I might start saving tiles that support that first quint hand. If I've got a solid 5, 7, 7, 9, I'm not going to walk away from that. But 3 jokers or 4 jokers can make a difference. And if you've got a couple of jokers, 2, 3, or 4, I avoid, like the plague, needing pairs. It's the last thing I want to get stuck needing when I have all those jokers that could go to naught. So that came up about pairs. If I'm playing a hand with 2 pairs, if I don't have one of the pairs and a half of the other pair, I don't go for that, particularly when I have jokers. And if there's a choice between 2 hands, one that you need pairs and one that you don't, and if I don't take my advice that I give to my students, I end up regretting it. So when do you throw a joker? Well, even people I've played with that have been playing for years, if they learned from Aunt Sally, she might not have told them, you throw jokers at the end. Mahjong 101. And if you haven't been taught that, they're the safest tiles to throw. I've seen somebody decide they think it's Fort Knox. What are you going to do with those jokers? You know, when the hand's over, they throw an 8 dot and it gives somebody Mahjong. So that's Mahjong 101. There are other times to throw a joker and exchange a joker. Most of the time you will want to exchange the joker because you don't want somebody else. And when somebody does an exposure with a joker, immediately everybody's looking at the table to see if those tiles are on the loose. If you've got the last 7 dot, you might think about, and if they've got other exposures, because you can make somebody jokerless. But what if you don't need the joker and you've got the 7 dot to exchange it? Well, 2 things. Either I'll throw the 7 dot and they'll say, oh, you forgot. Well, that's mum's the word. And you say, oh, I did forget, because you don't need it. Or you exchange the joker if you want to eliminate other people being able to get it, or if you want to camouflage, and you put it in where you have a pung and you throw one of those tiles out. That's not always the case because tiles can be hot. Also, sometimes I'll throw a joker because you know what? It puts everybody on the defensive. They're thinking, they're set. What are they going to need? When I see somebody throw a joker, a lot of times it's that flower that they need, but it's not always that flower. I've seen it be other things. So there's no one set. The one thing I will tell you is throw jokers at the end when you, just as they were saying, when you can't make a hand, you're going to throw the safest tiles that you possibly can. I save the jokers for later to throw. And we say same, not to be calling attention to throwing the joker. I think that's what has been on my list to share. I don't know if we have questions, but they're a hot topic. And don't groan when you don't get jokers. That's a tell. And I'm very similar to Michele and Barney. I played and I'm a chatty, talky, gregarious person, but when I'm playing Mahjong, I've got that mum's the word.
You know, Dara and I played with a friend yesterday at lunch very quickly, and she always says, I have no jokers. And after a while, I don't think I believe her. I think that's a way to, you know, she probably has a lot, just trying to throw us off track, because she always says it, right?
And by the way, the better is by rules, not allowed to say anything. They
Right.
shouldn't be giving tells. They should zip it.
And neither is a player's hand who's been called dead. They both have to remain quiet. And Michelle's hands up.
Yeah, incidentally, if anybody is betting and they do interfere in the game, they lose their bet. That's a rule.
Very good.
Just FYI, if someone isn't aware of that.
And then I think there was a question, or maybe it might have just come to me specifically. Just a quick recap of the proper etiquette for Joker exchange. Does someone want to take that?
Well, like I had mentioned, but I'll say it again. Two things. You may have the tile to exchange already sitting in your hand when it's been called, or you may pick the 7 dot. And that's why I think it's a good technique to pick and rack. It's not a Mahjong League rule. It's the best strategy and I start teaching that from, well, I teach them how to put hands together. Somebody asked about how to learn. My students are all spending time when we put as many hands together as possible. When we get into play, pick and rack, pick and rack, pick and rack. I feel like I should make a tape recording. I drill it in. So you want to pick and rack. Even if, guess what? If you're holding that 7 dot up and you're saying, oh, I got the 7 dot to exchange, and somebody says call, that 7 dot goes back in. So you want to pick, rack ideally, exchange, and we hand it to the person and say exchange. Then you take the joker, you put it on the sloping part of your rack, and then you throw out. Think of Pret. Pick, rack, exchange, and throw out.
Okay.
Because just for if you give somebody and put it on their rack and it's the wrong tile, there's no penalty to the person who put the wrong tile on the rack, but the person who no longer has the joker, their hand can be dead. So, okay.
Okay, so Linda Fisher is going to talk about risk assessment.
Okay, well, a lot of people have already touched on some aspect of risk assessment. Basically, my philosophy is that every tile you throw is a risk. And some tiles are more riskier than others, but on the flip side, every tile has a potential reward basis as well. If you throw a tile and somebody calls that tile, you really shouldn't think of it necessarily as a negative, because you're getting information about their hand. So you're getting something by taking that risk. And as the game goes on, you sort of have to weigh the risk-reward ratio of throwing particular tiles. And this is why that situational awareness of knowing what people are doing and being aware of what's going on is helpful. I think Theresa mentioned a situation where someone threw a flower and the person said, oh, that's safe, I'm going to throw a flower. Well, this happened in my game not long ago. Someone threw a flower. I was set for a flower. Well, I wasn't set yet for the flower, but I needed the flower. So my turn, I picked, oh, I got a joker. I put it in my hand. The player to my right threw a flower thinking it was safe because the player before me threw the flower, and I went out and mahjonged because she didn't see that I put something in my hand. So, I mean, it's something easy to miss, these little things, but they happen all the time. So again, if you're looking at somebody's exposures and you don't remember that they threw out a red dragon, so you don't realize what hand they're going through, you may hold on to a tile unnecessarily. But if you kind of remember and pay attention throughout the whole game, your ability to weigh the risk gets a little better. You know, and the question always comes up, you know, should I tank my hand or throw into an obvious hand? That's kind of a question that's always coming up. Again, the hand is only obvious if you've been paying attention. It's possible the person's not set. You know, what Barney talked about, the tells that people have when they're set. You can see sometimes if somebody's like switching out tiles or moving them back and forth, are they set? Are they separating their tiles? You know, there's ways to intuit if a person is set or not. And also you have to look at your own hand, your own possibility. I mean, if you only have 2 picks left and you need 3 tiles, you're not going to win. So, I mean, it's kind of counterintuitive to take that risk. It's also counterintuitive to call something, you know, at the last minute, you know, and put a joker in there. I've seen that happen where there's like 4 tiles left and somebody is not thinking logically and thinking that, oh, you know, I'll call that flower and I'll put a joker in there and I'll throw, and somebody's going to give me what I need, not knowing that all the other players are going to throw safe tiles. And so what happens, somebody takes that joker and goes out on the joker. So you have to like just have that situational awareness. And that just comes from focus and paying attention. And again, knowing, you know, reading the discards, knowing what's out, what's not out. One of the things I do when I play is I run through all the suit tiles in my head. I look at the table and I go 1 dot, 2 dot, 3 dot, 4 dot. If I don't see something, I know it's in play. Somebody's got it. So it's kind of like a little device that I use so I can know what's out there and what's not out there. And as my aunt used to say, what's not out is more important than what is out. So.
Terrific. So now we are back to Theresa for rules that players may not be aware of.
Okay, I'm going to back up a little bit and piggyback on something Linda said. When discarding, I do it in succession. So if it's, you know, if someone throws a flower, I'm the person to discard, then I'll discard a flower. But if I know there's a person in between and I want to discard a flower, like she said, I always pay attention, like, oh, I have a flower to discard, but I want to discard it, you know, two discards later. I pay attention to what people pick from the wall and put in their rack, and if they seem happy. Because if they seem happy, then I'm not discarding that flower. But if it's back to back, you know, the person to my left discards. Now it's my turn. I will then also discard a flower because it's 1, 2, bam, bam. You know, but if there's a player in between, I pay very close attention to what they're doing, and I have to really make that risk assessment to see, okay, how close am I to getting Mahjong? And if I'm far away, and I just throw my hand. Okay, so rules. First and foremost, please, everyone, if you don't own this already, buy it. I know it's for sale on Modern Mahjong. You can get it. It's the National Mahjong League's Mahjong Made Easy step-by-step challenging game. The latest one is 2020. Read through it. Most of the questions that are posed on social media are easily answered either by reading the card or just quickly going to this book and getting the answer. It's a lot faster than waiting for everyone to respond to your query. First and foremost, I'm sure most people play more than one game, right? We have 4 players and we get through several games. The rule is east. After you roll the dice and determine who's east, when the dice go around again to east is supposed to switch seats with a person to their right. Remember, everything in Mahjong is to the right except the walls. So even east switches seats with a person to their right. They remain being east. And the dice go around again. And then when it comes back to them, they switch again. And that is also a good way to tell how many games you played in a certain amount of time. So if you start at 10 and you go till 2 and east changed seats 8 times, well, you played 24 games. That's a lot of games. So then you can say, oh, on average, we play a 12-minute game. So it changes how the Charleston goes because everyone has their natural biases in the Charleston. Some people, they have all suited tiles and they only have one wind. That first right, that's one of the three tiles I have to think about. I'm putting that wind in there. Other people, especially when there's news, when we used to have singles of news, they keep it because they think, oh, by the end of the Charleston, I might have NEW and S, or maybe 3 of the 4. So it's interesting how the card will change the Charleston, but the players very much change the Charleston and how they pass. Some people will never pass a dragon until the very end when they know they never got collected dragons because they love them, and they'll do it in the optional or they'll do it in the last right. So, and some people don't care about passing the same suit first left, second left. So by changing the chair, East changing seats, it changes the Charleston completely. And that also determines if someone's hot. If East changes chairs and they're still hot and they're winning, they're really hot. But if you never change chairs and the person keeps winning game after game after game, it's because of how they're just have the natural benefit of how people pass in the Charleston. The other thing I see a lot of questions about online and social media is Mahjong in error. What to do, what happens. So anytime someone is declared dead or has Mahjong in error, all the tiles go back into their rack except for what was pre-exposed prior to being called dead. Whether there's Mahjong in error or not, all those tiles go back in your rack. That way there's no question that the exposure that was originally up there, if it has a joker, that's still a viable joker to be exchanged. That's number one. Number two, if someone calls Mahjong an error and they don't expose their hand, they call a tile a discard and they go, oh, Mahjong, and they put it on top of their rack and they build that exposure. And then that's all they did was an exposure. And they go, wait, I don't have Mahjong. That's fine, they're not dead. It's just the exposure remains, and it's as if they just called for an exposure. If they expose anything more than that and they're incorrect, yes, their hand is dead. The game continues on. One of the things I caution everyone with, even advanced players, because especially when you played with your group and you're all amazing players, you never miscall a tile, misname a tile, everyone's really competitive. Once in a while, people screw up. We're all human. And people say Mahjong, and they go, and people have already flipping their racks. What did you need? Or I needed a 2 crack or whatever. And they're flipping their racks. They're messing up the walls. Don't do any of that until you verify the Mahjong is correct, because you just never know. And it's just good habit. Just like Donna Miller-Small said, you always rack your tile. Your turn does not begin until you have your 14th tile racked. So even if you have to do a joker exchange or anything, you rack your tile. Same thing with Mahjong. You wait until the person is 100% shown their Mahjong and you know for sure they have it before you do anything else. Because if you disturb the wall, like who pays if you play for money, there's a whole different scenarios on who pays what player based on who messed up. If you mess up the walls, if you throw in your tiles, read that. And it's on page 19, page 13. Picking from the wrong end, picking from the wrong wall. I highly recommend reading that and at least having this on hand, because sometimes it's a lot to remember. So if you have this on hand, say, oh, wait, let's stop the game for a second. So-and-so picked from the wrong end, or so-and-so pushed out the wrong wall. What do we do? And the last thing I do want to emphasize is tile consistency. If you knock a tile over by accident, put it back where you found it. Don't hide it, bury it. That's not what you're supposed to do. Just because you saw it doesn't mean anyone else saw it. Put it right back where you found it and leave it alone. That's the rule. So I don't know if there's any other rules that people are like, oh, go over that. Anything that you feel it.
Question from Kim White about what about miscalling a tile?
Miscalling a tile, like
misnaming
it. So if you misname a tile, and someone wants it for exposure, there's no penalty to anybody. So Mahjong is a looking and listening game. So a lot of times it's usually like 6 crack, 8 crack for some reason, because they look so similar, the numbers. Also, you know, pay attention. If you're learning the game, learn the Chinese symbols on cracks. That is very helpful, because a lot of times someone will say 8 crack and you'll look like, oh, that's a 6. And before even your brain tells you, no, that's a 6, that's not an 8. You already know that there's something up. And then you're like, oh, wait. And then you look a little more closely at the number. If you accidentally pick up a tile, let's say you weren't paying attention, someone says 8 crack, and that's what you need, and you find an 8 crack and put it up, it's the other players that are supposed to be paying attention as well, saying, no, that wasn't what was thrown. She actually threw a 6 crack. There's no penalty. But if it's Mahjong, someone throws an 8 crack, you say Mahjong, and it's a correct Mahjong. If it were an 8 crack, the other person who misnamed the tile that gave you Mahjong has to pay for the table.
Right. And then this was a really confusing one. If someone puts down a 6 dot and it's really a 6 crack and 2 people call for it, the person who needed the real tile that was discarded, that was actually looking, is the one that the Mahjong goes to. That was a question way back in a bulletin.
Yes. So a tile cannot be, oh, I've got low power. A tile cannot be called until it is correctly named. And if 2 people want Mahjong, but one is for the incorrect tile and one is for the real tile, it's the real tile.
Okay, great. So I know we're running a little late, but our last topic is advanced way of thinking, losing, and winning streaks. And Barney's going to talk about that.
Okay, this is a fun topic, and it's just really more thought-provoking than anything else. But how many times have we heard someone say, I am on the worst losing streak of my life? And I always say, really? Have you written it down on a piece of paper? Do you really know you've had the worst losing streak of your life? So I couldn't help but thinking about a very simple scenario. For those of you who play an online version of the game, I play on something called Mahjong Time. That's the game I use. And you are allowed to join what's called a marathon. And so when you go into a marathon room, you are required to play 4 games. Okay, so you're going to play 4 games with the same people, typically good players. You're done in 40 minutes, that type of thing. And I did some really, really simple math on 2 situations. What is the probability of winning all 4 games? Okay, I'm not going to show you how to do the math, but if we just assume that everything was equal, we're playing with equal players, there's only 5 outcomes. You can win, one of your 3 opponents can win, or there could be a wall game. So there's only 5 outcomes, right? So to figure out the probability of Linda winning all 4 of the games, you take the 1 in 5, that's the 1 in 5 chance that she's going to win, you multiply that 4 times out, and the probability that anyone is going to win all 4 games is 1 in 625. Okay, that is about 1/10 of 1%. So if you're playing 4 games and somebody wins 4 games in a row, that was pretty darn remarkable. It's going to happen, but it's pretty darn remarkable. Now let's take the inverse. What's the probability that Linda doesn't win any of the 4 games? Well, guess what? 41%. That's going to happen 41% of the time that you go into a marathon of 4 games. 41% of the time you are going to lose all 4 games. So it's a little funny thing to say, streaks are going to come and go, but don't forget the math of when you're playing a game where you only have a 20% chance of winning something. And that's the game that we love, that we're passionate about. So you're going to have a lot of losing and less winning. Linda, you had your hand up.
I define winning if I leave the room with a little bit more money than I came in with.
Yes, yes, that's true.
So over the course of the night, if we played 16 games, if I won 50 cents, I'm a winner.
Yes, absolutely. Me too.
I'd like to add something to that. Someone commented on it in chat, and my husband sometimes listens in the background when I do Mahjong anything, whether I'm playing or doing my live streams or what have you. And at one point, the topic of a losing streak came up, and I don't remember how it came to be, but he came up with the idea of it's not a losing streak, it's a learning streak.
Yeah,
Ooh, good one. Yay.
I'm on
that's
a
a good one.
learning
a
streak.
learning streak.
Yes.
I wanted to jump in. From what I remember reading about jokers, that changed the luck part of the game. I don't have the history, but when you think about it, when you're not picking jokers, it doesn't mean you can't be going for other hands. And we debate how much skill and luck is involved in Mahjong, and we've come up with 30 to 40% skill and 60 to 70% luck. This is a game of luck and picking. And people that win consistently, they say, oh, they're lucky. I think that's not the definition of luck. There is skill involved. And if you're really a skillful player, and there's somebody who's plays in a lot of tournaments that I've played with in the area I live, they think she could be a lucky player. She is a good, seasoned player who plays 6 or 7 days a week, goes to tournaments, and and I watch her, she's very skilled at the Charleston and picking a hand.
Michelle?
I'd just like to add something super quick to this learning or losing, or no, the luck factor real quick. I think that it's more about a spectrum. If you're a beginner, your luck to skill ratio is going to be different than a player who's advanced and has experience in the game. So I'd say a beginner is going to have a higher luck factor, but a skilled player, advanced player is going to have a lower luck factor and a higher, because they have those skills, they have the skill factor. So that is going to be on a spectrum. It's not a cut and dry 75% or even 50-50. It's a spectrum.
I agree with that. I agree.
Yeah, I agree
Good.
completely too.
Good,
Yep.
good point, because I've seen beginning players who I set up with one hand and then they're throwing everything out, and I change it and they pick in stuff and they make the hand. Did they know what to do? No. So yes, it is a spectrum based on your experience and your skill. Absolutely. And when I play with less skillful players, I feel like I win more also. I've seen that.
And if you eat pasta, your luck goes down.
So when I drink wine, my luck goes down.
Well, yeah, I don't consider, Julia Roberts said on TV that it's not a drinking game, and I kind of have to agree with her. But there's some people that's, they fit 3 games in a 4-hour period because it's a great excuse to play. So there's Mahjong ranges for everyone.
That's right.
Everyone comes to the table for a different reason.
Yes.
And
that's-
Dara and I are laughing about the pasta comment because we have a lot of events and we serve cold food sandwiches and salads. Oh, what? No hot food? And then we had hot food the last time and they're like, oh, we want cold food, so we can't win. We try.
No pasta salad. No pasta, no pasta salad.
That's right.
We really want to say thank you. It's amazing that there's so many people in our Mahjong community that want to learn and want to take away all these tips from these wonderful, experienced and generous players and teachers and collectors. And if you haven't seen our other Zooms with them, we suggest you visit our YouTube channel. Just a little housekeeping. We do this on our dime because we just want to grow our community. So if you want to say thank you, feel free, here's our shameless plug, to visit our website. It's modernmahjong.com. All of the panelists do this on their dime. They are taking away from their days to prepare for this, to be here, and to share. I mean, friends of mine that are playing with us just got tips to play against me and Donna. So we appreciate you sharing. Our upcoming event, our next Zoom is Donna Wave, Kassman Wave. So there's Donna Kassman and now Donna Miller. They're both Donna Miller. So the two of them and I are going to be on our next Zoom. We're going to kick off our book launch for Modern American Canasta. That's March 22nd. We have a Zoom panel on tournament play, and you will get to meet up again with Barney and Donna Miller-Small, Linda Sachs, a player in LA, Rhonda Brooks, a tournament director, and Barbara and Jennifer Baer, who are mother-daughter tournament directors for Mahjong Fever. That is March 29th. We have our, should I say, famous card review with Barney.
Barney, infamous.
Which is just invaluable. I mean, there are so many little tips that he is so mathematical, and just certain things that he says that just get in the back of your brain. And as you're playing, you're like, wait a second, I remember I can't do that hand because Barney reminded me of this. So he tells you the dangerous tiles, the singles that are to look out for. So highly recommend.
Right, and just for anyone who's asking, the Mahjong League is going to mail the cards out the end of March. So it's coming as soon as they can get it. We'll have Barney on
We
April
do not
4th.
get a sneak peek, and Barney does not get a sneak peek.
No.
We have our luncheon in Fort Lauderdale, and we do plan on doing other events outside of Florida, but for now, our next event is in Florida, and Michele Frizzell is coming down Sunday, April 23rd. And we are so thrilled. We have so many people coming from all over Florida and flying in from Oklahoma and beyond. And we're kicking off our Mahjong for Memories event because we raise money every year for Alzheimer's. And we haven't really officially announced it yet. Last year, we raised $26,000 from all of you. Donna, you want to tell them this year?
This year, we have a minimum donation of $56,000. So donate to Alzheimer's Association. So we're very excited about that.
And then after that, after our luncheon with Michele, we have virtual vintage with many people on tonight: Theresa, Shirley Hannick, Karen Robertson, Toby Salk, Greg Swain, and Tony Watson.
Wow.
And if you have any other ideas of things you want to learn about and you want to share, please email us. I will put our email.
And I just want to say two things. So for the first time, Dara and I are going to go to a tournament in Piscataway, New Jersey. We're going to be vendors. We're not playing in the tournament, but that's April 14th to the 16th. So we will be in Piscataway. And also a lot of people have said this went too fast for them. Some of their friends didn't get on. Some didn't realize it was Eastern Standard Time. So just go to our youtube.com Modern Mahjong channel and we'll have it up by tomorrow morning and you can rewatch.
And when you, well, I don't know about tomorrow morning, but we'll have it up soon. But also while you watch it, you can pause.
You can pause and slow it down.
Yeah. Slow it down, pause.
Yeah.
And Alzheimer's, that's so sweet of you. We do have a team, and we will put that in the notes when we share it on YouTube.
It's Modern Mahjong for Memories team. And yeah, we're very excited. Well, thank you everybody for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank
Been
you
fun.
for having us here. It was a great time.
It was nice to
I
see
love
you.
seeing everybody.